Marcus Chen had always believed that the worst part of being humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Trade Council was the paperwork. 3 years of filing reports, attending diplomatic meetings, and translating human customs into formats that 12 different alien species could understand had worn him down to the point where he seriously considered requesting a transfer back to Earth's agricultural colonies. He was wrong about the paperwork being the worst part. The worst part was being fined by a 7-foot-tall dragon warrior for excessive diplomatic charm while standing in the central plaza of Nexus Station, the galaxy's primary trade hub. The fine itself wasn't even the problem. It was only 50 credits, barely enough to buy a decent meal in the station's human quarter. The problem was that Zarath Velter, the Draconian Empire's most feared enforcement officer, was standing close enough that he could smell the sulfur that naturally emanated from her scales, and she was looking at him with those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through his diplomatic training. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive draconian rumble that made most species instinctively step backward. "You are aware that Article 847 of the Galactic Commerce Code specifically prohibits the use of what humans call small talk during official trade negotiations." Marcus adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he'd developed since arriving on Nexus Station. "Commander Velter, I was simply expressing genuine interest in Ambassador Krextel's family. On Earth, we consider it polite to. On Earth, you consider many things polite that the rest of the galaxy finds manipulative." She tapped her enforcement tablet with one clawed finger, the sound like metal on stone. "The Thorian delegation filed a complaint stating that your inquiry about their offspring's molting cycle made them feel obligated to offer better terms on the titanium shipment." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. 3 years ago, when Earth had first been granted membership in the Galactic Trade Council, everyone had assumed that humans would struggle with the complex politics and subtle social hierarchies that governed interstellar commerce. Instead, humans had proven to be uncomfortably good at reading other species, at finding common ground, and at making connections that transcended traditional diplomatic boundaries. Too good, apparently. "Commander, I understand the Thorians' concern, but I genuinely wanted to know about their family. The molting cycle is a significant event in Thorian culture, and asking about it during price negotiations created an emotional connection that influenced their business judgment." Zarath's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "This is the 4th complaint filed against you this month, Mr. Chen. The Crystalline Collective claims you used inappropriate warmth when discussing their mining operations. The Ethereal Syndicate states that your excessive empathy regarding their recent territorial disputes made them feel guilty for their initial trade proposals." Marcus couldn't help but smile despite the situation. "So I'm being fined for being too nice." "You're being fined for weaponizing niceness." Zarath stepped closer, and Marcus caught a hint of something else beneath the sulfur smell, something that reminded him of cinnamon and starlight. "The galaxy has rules about emotional manipulation in trade negotiations, Mr. Chen, even unintentional manipulation. But that's just how humans interact. We build relationships, we show interest in each other's lives, You make other species want to trust you." The words came out sharper than Marcus expected, and he saw something flicker across Zarath's expression, something that might have been admiration if dragons were capable of admiring anything other than strength and fire. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Marcus looked around the plaza, taking in the usual crowd of traders, diplomats, and travelers from across the galaxy. Nexus Station was supposed to be neutral ground, a place where differences were set aside in favor of commerce and cooperation. But he'd learned that neutrality in space was a delicate balance, maintained through careful protocols and strict adherence to rules that prevented any one species from gaining too much influence. "I don't think being friendly is dangerous, Commander." "Of course you don't." Zarath's laugh was like distant thunder. "Your species has been in space for what, 50 years? You still think the galaxy operates on trust and goodwill." "Doesn't it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment, the fierce enforcement officer who had brought down smuggling rings and settled trade disputes with swift, decisive action looked almost uncertain. "Mr. Chen, there are species in this galaxy that have been trading with each other for millennia. The Draconian Empire alone has been part of the Trade Council for over 3,000 years. We've learned that trust is a luxury that can destroy civilizations." Marcus studied her face, nodding the way her scales caught the artificial sunlight that filtered down from the station's dome. Draconian features were supposed to be unreadable to most species, but he'd spent enough time around aliens to pick up on subtle cues. There was something in the way she held her head, the slight tension around her eyes, that suggested this conversation was more personal than professional. "But you still trust someone to enforce the rules," he said quietly. "The Trade Council trusts you to be fair, to make judgment calls about what counts as manipulation and what counts as genuine interaction. That's trust. That's necessity." But her voice had lost some of its official edge. "The galaxy needs enforcers who can remain objective, who won't be swayed by charm or emotional appeals." "Is that why you became an enforcement officer? To stay objective?" Zarath's claws extended slightly, a sign of agitation that Marcus had learned to recognize during his diplomatic training. "Mr. Chen, you're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Making me want to answer personal questions when I should be processing your fine and moving on to the next case." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with an honesty that surprised them both. Marcus realized that this was the longest conversation he'd ever had with Commander Velter, despite seeing her around the station for months. She was usually all business, swift, efficient, and intimidating enough that most people paid their fines without argument. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Marcus said carefully. "Getting to know each other, I mean. We're both trying to make the galaxy work better, just from different angles. You see, this is exactly what the complaints are about." But Zarath didn't step back, and her voice carried more frustration than anger. "You make it sound reasonable, even beneficial. You make other species think that emotional connection is more valuable than protective distance." "Maybe because it is." The words slipped out before Marcus could stop them, and he saw Zarath's eyes widen slightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The plaza continued its usual bustle around them, but Marcus felt as if they were standing in a bubble of sudden quiet. "Mr. Chen," Zarath's voice was softer now, almost uncertain. "Do you realize what you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe the galaxy's rules about emotional distance exist because people are afraid of being vulnerable. But vulnerability isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's courage." Zarath stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her processing his words, weighing them against years of training and cultural conditioning. Draconians were known for their strength, their fierce independence, their ability to make difficult decisions without emotional compromise. The idea that vulnerability could be courage would be revolutionary to someone raised in that tradition. "You humans," she said finally, "are either the bravest species in the galaxy or the most foolish." "Maybe both." Another laugh, warmer this time. "Definitely both." She turned back to her tablet, and Marcus thought the moment had passed. But then she looked up again, and there was something different in her expression, something that looked almost like curiosity. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something, off the record?" "Of course." "How do you do it? How do you walk into a room full of beings who could destroy your species without effort and treat them like friends?" The question was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Marcus felt his diplomatic training fall away completely. This wasn't Ambassador Chen speaking to Commander Velter anymore. This was just two people, standing in a plaza full of strangers, trying to understand each other. "Because they could destroy us," he said simply. "Because they're powerful and dangerous and completely different from everything I know. And that means if they choose to be kind, if they choose to work with us instead of against us, it's not because they have to. It's because they want to. That makes their friendship worth something." Zarath was quiet for a long time, her golden eyes searching his face. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "No one has ever put it that way before. Maybe no one ever thought to ask you about it before. Maybe," she glanced around the plaza, as if suddenly aware that they were having this conversation in public. "Mr. Chen, I need to process your fine." "Of course." She tapped her tablet, and Marcus felt his personal account decrease by 50 credits. But instead of walking away, she continued to stand there, as if there was something else she wanted to say. "Commanders." "Zarath," she said quietly, when we're not conducting official business, you can call me Zarath." The offer felt significant, though Marcus wasn't entirely sure why. "Zarath, and you can call me Marcus." "Marcus," She tested the name, her accent turning the familiar syllables into something almost musical. Can I ask you another question? Always. This thing that humans do, this building connections with other species, is it something you learn or something you're born with? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think it's something we choose. Every time we meet someone new, we have a choice. We can focus on the differences, the reasons to be afraid or suspicious, or we can look for the things that make us similar, the common ground we share. And you always choose the common ground. I try to. Sometimes it's harder than others. Zarath nodded slowly, as if filing away this information for later consideration. I should go. I have other cases to process. Of course, thank you for explaining the fine and for the conversation. She started to walk away, then turned back. Marcus. Yes. The reason I became an enforcement officer, it wasn't to stay objective. It was because I wanted to make things fair for everyone. Before Marcus could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the fluid grace that all Draconians seem to possess. He stood there for a moment, watching the spot where she'd vanished, and realized that something had shifted during their conversation. Something that felt important, though he couldn't quite name what it was. His communicator buzzed with a message from the Earth Embassy, reminding him about his afternoon appointment with the Centaurian trade delegation. Marcus sighed and headed toward the diplomatic quarter, but found himself thinking about golden eyes and the way Zarath had said his name. The galaxy suddenly felt like a more interesting place. 3 days later, Marcus was reviewing quarterly trade reports when his office door chimed. He looked up to see Zarath standing in the doorway, though she looked different somehow. Less official. She was still wearing her enforcement uniform, but there was something in her posture that seemed more relaxed. Commander, Marcus said, standing up, is there a problem? No problem, and it's Zarath, remember. She stepped into his office, looking around at the Earth memorabilia he'd scattered on his desk and shelves. I wanted to follow up on our conversation the other day. About the fine. About choice. She picked up a small replica of the Golden Gate Bridge from his desk, examining it carefully. You said that humans choose to look for common ground. I've been thinking about that. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Would you like to sit? She hesitated for a moment, then settled into the chair with surprising grace. The furniture had been designed for human proportions, but she managed to make it work. I've been watching you, she said, setting the bridge replica back on his desk. Not officially, just observing how you interact with other species. The Crystalline Collective Ambassador mentioned that you asked about their children's formation ceremony. The Thorian delegation said you remembered their cultural holidays. The Ethereal Syndicate speaks highly of your understanding of their territorial customs. Is that bad? It's unprecedented. Zarath leaned forward slightly. Marcus, do you realize that most species consider personal information to be either irrelevant to business or potentially dangerous intelligence? But that's exactly why it matters. If someone trusts you with personal information, it means they see you as more than just a transaction partner. They see you as, well, as a being worthy of trust. Yes, but Zarath stopped, as if catching herself in mid-argument. You're doing it again. What? Making it sound reasonable, making me want to agree with you. Marcus smiled. Maybe because it is reasonable, and maybe because you do agree with me at least a little. The silence that followed was charged with something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Zarath was looking at him with those golden eyes again, but this time there was something different in her expression, something that looked almost like recognition. Marcus watched Zarath carefully, noting the way her scales seemed to shift color slightly in the soft lighting of his office. He'd learned that draconian scales were more expressive than most people realized, often reflecting subtle emotional states that their faces kept hidden. Zarath, he said gently, can I ask what brought you here today, really? She was quiet for a moment, her claws tapping against the arm of the chair in a rhythm that reminded Marcus of distant rainfall. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested this wasn't easy for her. I've been enforcement officer for 8 years, she said. Before that, I was military, part of the Draconian Imperial Guard. My entire life has been about maintaining order, following protocols, keeping emotional distance from the beings I work with. That sounds lonely. It's necessary, Or at least I always believed it was necessary. She looked up at him, and Marcus saw something vulnerable in her expression. But watching you work, seeing how you interact with other species, it's made me question things I never thought to question before. Marcus leaned back in his chair, giving her space to continue. Yesterday, I processed a dispute between the Aquatic Collective and a human mining consortium. Standard resource allocation conflict, the kind of thing I've handled hundreds of times. But as I was reviewing the case files, I noticed something. What did you notice? The human negotiator, a woman named Sarah Martinez, had included personal notes about each member of the aquatic delegation. Not strategic intelligence, just personal details. One of the aquatics had recently lost a spawn mate. Another was celebrating their first successful deepwater meditation. A third was worried about pollution affecting their home reef. Marcus nodded. That sounds like Sarah. She's our best environmental liaison. But here's what surprised me, Zarath continued. When I cross-referenced these notes with the final agreement, I realized that the humans had structured the deal to address those personal concerns. The mining schedule was adjusted to avoid the grieving period. The contract included funding for reef preservation. The negotiation timeline accommodated the meditation schedule. And that bothered you? It should have bothered me. According to every protocol I've been trained to follow, that level of personal consideration should count as emotional manipulation. But when I interviewed the aquatic delegation, they weren't angry or resentful. They were grateful. They felt heard, respected, valued as individuals rather than just representatives of their species. Marcus could see where this was leading, but he waited for her to reach the conclusion on her own. I've been thinking about that conversation we had, Zarath said slowly. About choice, about vulnerability being courage. And I've been wondering if maybe the galaxy's rules about emotional distance aren't protecting us from manipulation. Maybe they're preventing us from forming the kinds of connections that could make us stronger. What do you think? I think humans might be onto something that the rest of us have forgotten. She met his eyes directly. I think maybe the galaxy needs more connection, not less. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did Marcus. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the revelation settling between them. Zarath, Marcus said carefully, can I tell you something about my first week on Nexus Station? She nodded. I was terrified, not just nervous or uncertain, genuinely terrified. Earth had never had an ambassador to the Trade Council before, and I knew that everything I did would reflect on my entire species. One mistake, one cultural misunderstanding, and humanity could lose its membership before we'd even gotten started. But you seemed so confident during those early negotiations. That was pure acting. I spent hours every night researching customs and protocols, trying to make sure I wouldn't accidentally offend anyone. Do you know what changed that? What? You did. Zarath's eyes widened. Me. My second day here, I was walking through the market district, still trying to get my bearings. I accidentally bumped into a crystalline trader and knocked over their display of mineral samples. I was scrambling to pick everything up, apologizing in 3 different languages, convinced I'd just created a diplomatic incident. Marcus smiled at the memory. And then you appeared, this 7-foot dragon warrior who could have reduced me to ash with a glance. I thought I was about to be arrested for disturbing the peace. I remember that. You looked like you expected me to execute you on the spot. But instead, you helped me pick up the crystals. You explained to the trader that it was an accident, that humans weren't familiar with crystalline display customs yet. You turned what could have been a disaster into a learning moment. Zarath looked confused. That was just basic enforcement protocol. Maintain station harmony, prevent escalation. No, it wasn't. Marcus leaned forward. I've seen enforcement officers handle similar situations since then. Most would have issued a warning, maybe a small fine, and moved on. But you took the time to educate rather than punish. You showed compassion to a nervous human who was clearly in over his head. Zarath seemed to be processing this interpretation of events. I never thought of it that way. That's when I realized that the galaxy might be full of rules about emotional distance, but that doesn't mean every being follows them. Some people, some dragons, choose kindness even when they don't have to. The color of Zarath's scales shifted again, this time to a warmer golden hue that Marcus had never seen before. You remember that? She asked softly. Of course, I remember it. It was the first time someone on this station treated me like a person instead of a diplomatic curiosity. It mattered to me. It mattered to you enough that you built your entire approach to diplomacy around it. Marcus thought about that. Maybe. I realized that if one act of unexpected kindness could make such a difference to me, maybe I could do the same for others. Maybe that's what diplomacy should be, not just negotiating treaties, but building bridges between people who might not otherwise trust each other. Zareth was quiet for a long time, her golden eyes thoughtful. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus, can I tell you something? About why I really became an enforcement officer. Of course. It wasn't about making things fair for everyone. I mean, that's part of it, but it wasn't the real reason. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a difficult confession. I became an enforcement officer because I wanted to matter, because I wanted to be more than just another draconian soldier following orders. You wanted to make a difference. I wanted to prove that I could make difficult decisions, that I could be trusted with responsibility, that I was worth something beyond my ability to fight and follow commands. Her claws extended slightly, a sign of emotional stress. Growing up in the Draconian Empire, strength is everything. Physical strength, military prowess, unwavering loyalty to the hierarchy. But I always felt like there should be more to life than that. Marcus could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of years spent trying to fit into a role that didn't quite match who she was inside. When I was assigned to Nexus Station, Zareth continued, I thought I'd finally found my place. Independent authority, the chance to make real decisions, the opportunity to work with beings from across the galaxy. But even here, I was still following protocols, still maintaining that emotional distance that's supposed to protect us all. Until you started watching humans interact with other species. Until I started watching you interact with other species. She looked up at him, and Marcus saw something raw and honest in her expression. You made it look so easy, so natural, like connecting with others was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. It's not easy, Marcus said gently. Every conversation is a risk. Every attempt at connection could backfire, could cause offense, could make things worse instead of better. But the alternative is never knowing who these people really are, never building the kinds of relationships that could make the galaxy a better place. But how do you find the courage for that risk? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of Zarath's genuine uncertainty. Marcus realized that this conversation had moved far beyond diplomacy or trade regulations. This was about fundamental questions of how to live, how to connect with others, how to be vulnerable in a universe that often rewarded strength over softness. I think about what I might miss if I don't try, Marcus said slowly. Every being I meet has a story, has experiences and perspectives that could teach me something new. If I keep them at a distance to protect myself, I'm not just staying safe, I'm choosing ignorance over understanding. And if they reject your attempts at connection, if they see vulnerability as weakness, then I learn something about them too, and I move on knowing I tried. Marcus studied her face, nodding the way her scales had shifted to deeper gold, almost bronze. But Zareth, I've found that most beings are hungry for genuine connection. They might not know how to ask for it, might not even realize they want it, but when someone offers authentic interest and respect, most people respond to that. Most people, including draconian enforcement officers who help clumsy human ambassadors pick up scattered crystals. That earned him another laugh, warmer and more genuine than any he'd heard from her before. You really think that moment mattered? She asked. I think it changed both of our lives, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Zareth was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes thoughtful. Then she reached across his desk and picked up the Golden Gate Bridge replica again, turning it over in her hands with surprising delicacy. This is from your home world. From my home city, San Francisco. I grew up about 10 minutes from that bridge. What was it like growing up on Earth? The personal question surprised Marcus, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was the first purely personal question Zareth had ever asked him. He could see the effort it took for her to make that leap from professional to personal conversation. Crowded, he said with a smile. Noisy, beautiful in ways that I didn't appreciate until I left. There were millions of people around me, but sometimes I felt completely alone. Alone with millions of people. Being surrounded by people doesn't guarantee connection. Sometimes it makes loneliness worse because you're constantly reminded of what you're missing. Zarath nodded slowly, as if recognizing something familiar in his words. "Is that why you became a diplomat?" she asked. "To avoid being alone." "Maybe, or maybe to help other people avoid being alone." Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering. "I think diplomacy, at its best, is about building connections between beings who might otherwise never understand each other. It's about creating a universe where no one has to be truly alone." That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's also terrifying when you consider the responsibility involved. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared honesty settling between them. Marcus realized that this was the kind of conversation he'd hoped to have when he'd first arrived on Nexus Station. Not the formal diplomatic exchanges or trade negotiations, but genuine connection with another being who was trying to make sense of their place in the galaxy. "Marcus," Zarath said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask me anything." "Do you ever wonder what would happen if you stopped being an ambassador? If you just let yourself be Marcus Chen, the person, instead of Marcus Chen, the representative of humanity?" The question hit closer to home than Marcus expected. He'd been so focused on representing his species, on being the perfect diplomatic ambassador, that he sometimes forgot there was a person underneath all that responsibility. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "but I'm not sure I know where the ambassador ends and the person begins anymore." "Maybe that's the point," Zarath said softly. "Maybe the best diplomats are the ones who can't separate their professional responsibilities from their personal values." "Is that what you think I am? A good diplomat?" "I think you're a good person who happens to be in a diplomatic position. And I think that might be the most dangerous combination in the galaxy." "Dangerous?" "Because you make people want to trust you, because you make connection look possible, even necessary." She set the bridge replica back on his desk, but didn't break eye contact. "Because you make beings like me start to question everything we thought we knew about how the universe works." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with implications that neither of them was quite ready to address directly. Marcus felt the shift in the conversation, the way it had moved from professional discussion to something more personal and vulnerable. He could see the uncertainty in Zarath's golden eyes, as if she was surprised by her own honesty and wasn't sure how to proceed. "Zarath," he said carefully, "what are you really asking me?" She was quiet for a long moment, her claws tracing abstract patterns on the arm of her chair. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "I'm asking if you think it's possible for someone to change the fundamental way they interact with the universe. If someone who's spent their entire life maintaining distance and following protocols could learn to be more like you." The vulnerability in her voice made Marcus's chest tight. He could see how much courage it had taken for her to ask that question, to admit that she wanted to be different than she'd always been. "I think people change all the time," he said gently. "But the real question is whether you want to change and whether you're willing to accept the risks that come with it." "What risks?" "Being hurt, being disappointed, having people reject your attempts at connection, or worse, use your openness against you." Marcus leaned forward, meeting her eyes directly. "When you open yourself up to others, you give them the power to affect you in ways that can't be undone." "But you think it's worth it." "I think the alternative is worse. I think spending your life behind walls, never knowing what real connection feels like, never experiencing the joy of truly understanding another being, I think that's not living at all." Zarath nodded slowly, as if weighing his words against her own experiences. "Can I tell you something?" she said, "about what it's been like watching you work?" "Please." "At first, I thought you were naive, foolishly optimistic about the nature of interstellar relations. I expected you to fail spectacularly within your first few months, to learn the hard way that the galaxy doesn't reward emotional vulnerability." "But I didn't fail." "No, you didn't. If anything, you've been more successful than any ambassador in recent memory. The trade agreements you've negotiated have been consistently favorable to all parties involved. Conflicts that should have taken months to resolve get settled in days when you're involved. Species that have been suspicious of each other for centuries are suddenly finding common ground." Marcus felt a flush of pride at her words, but also a growing sense of where this conversation was heading. "And that bothers you?" he asked. "It bothers me because it proves that everything I was taught about emotional distance might be wrong. It bothers me because it suggests that I've been doing my job incorrectly for 8 years." She paused, her scales shifting to a deeper bronze color. "But mostly, it bothers me because it makes me wonder what my life might have been like if I'd learned to connect with others the way you do." The honesty in her voice was breathtaking. Marcus realized that he was seeing a side of Zarath that she probably didn't show to anyone, the person behind the enforcement officer, the individual behind the official role. "It's not too late," he said softly. "You could start connecting with people now." "How? I don't know how to do small talk. I don't know how to ask personal questions without it feeling like an interrogation. I don't know how to be warm." Marcus smiled at that. "Zarath, you're being warm right now. This entire conversation has been warm. You're sharing your thoughts, your uncertainties, your hopes for something better. That's exactly what connection looks like." She looked surprised, as if she hadn't realized what she'd been doing. "This feels warm to you. This feels like two people getting to know each other, being honest about who they are and what they want from life. If that's not warmth, I don't know what is." "But I'm supposed to be intimidating. Draconians are supposed to be fierce and distant, and you can be all of those things when the situation calls for it. But you can also be curious and thoughtful and genuinely interested in other people. You don't have to choose just one way of being." Zarath was quiet for a moment, processing this idea. "Marcus," she said finally, "can I ask you something that might be inappropriate?" "You can ask me anything. What would it be like, do you think, if we were friends? Really friends, not just professional acquaintances?" The question caught Marcus off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was so direct. Most people approach the subject of friendship gradually, through shared experiences and slowly increasing intimacy. But Zarath was asking him to imagine their relationship as something completely different, as if she needed to understand the destination before she could begin the journey. "I think it would be incredible," Marcus said honestly. "I think you have perspectives and experiences that would challenge me to think differently about everything. I think you're funny in ways that most people probably don't get to see. I think you care deeply about fairness and justice, but you also have a curiosity about the universe that your job doesn't let you explore. You think I'm funny. You have this dry sense of humor that catches me off guard. The way you described my weaponizing niceness, that was funny, dark but funny." Zarath seemed pleased by this observation, her scales lightening slightly. "What else do you think friendship with me would be like?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think you'd be fiercely loyal. I think you'd challenge me when I'm wrong, but support me when I need it. I think you'd introduce me to parts of draconian culture that most humans never get to see. And I think you'd help me become a better diplomat, a better person, because you'd push me to think beyond human perspectives." "And what would you bring to the friendship?" "I'd bring curiosity about your world, your experiences, your thoughts on everything from enforcement protocols to the meaning of existence. I'd bring respect for who you are, not just what you do. And I'd bring honesty, the good kind and the difficult kind." "The difficult kind." "Sometimes friends have to tell each other hard truths. If you were my friend, I'd tell you when I thought you were being too hard on yourself, or when I disagreed with your decisions, or when I thought you were hiding behind your official role instead of being authentic." Zarath nodded slowly. "And you want me to do the same for you?" "I'd need you to do the same for me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them contemplating this hypothetical friendship that felt less hypothetical with each passing minute. "Marcus," Zarath said eventually, "I have a confession to make." "What's that?" "I've been looking forward to our interactions for weeks now. Even when I was coming to find you or discuss enforcement issues, I found myself hoping the conversation would last longer, that we might talk about something beyond trade regulations." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest at her admission. "Really?" "Really, and yesterday, when I was thinking about our conversation in the plaza, I realized something." "What did you realize?" "I realized that you're the first being in years who's made me want to be better than I am. Not stronger or more efficient or more intimidating, better. More curious, more open, more human." The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight that neither of them had expected. Zarath, Marcus said gently, you don't need to become more human, you need to become more yourself. What do you mean? I mean that everything I admire about you, your sense of justice, your curiosity about other people, your willingness to question systems that don't serve everyone, those aren't human qualities. Those are Zarath qualities. You don't need to change species, you just need permission to be who you already are underneath all those protocols. She stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see something shifting in her expression. You really think that's who I am, underneath everything? I think that's who you've been all along. I think that's why you helped me with the crystals on my second day, why you've been thinking about our conversations, why you came here today to talk about connection and vulnerability. The person you're afraid of becoming is the person you've always been. Zarath's scales shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before, a warm, luminous gold that seemed to glow from within. If that's true, she said slowly, then I've been hiding from myself for a very long time. Most people do, to some extent. The universe can be a scary place, and it's easier to follow established patterns than to risk being authentic. But you think authentic is worth the risk. I think authentic is the only way to build the kinds of connections that make life meaningful. Zarath stood up suddenly, moving to the small window that looked out onto the station's main plaza. Marcus could see her reflection in the glass, could see the way she was wrestling with something internal. Marcus, she said without turning around, can I tell you why I really came here today? Of course. I came here because I've been having thoughts that I don't know how to process. Thoughts about what it would be like to be friends with you, to spend time together outside of official business, to learn about Earth and humans and what makes you so different from everyone else in the galaxy. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, though he wasn't entirely sure why. And that scares you? It terrifies me. She turned back to face him, and Marcus could see the conflict in her golden eyes. Because I've never wanted to be friends with anyone before. I've had colleagues and allies and professional relationships, but I've never met someone who made me curious about friendship itself. Curiosity is good, Marcus said carefully. Curiosity is how we grow. But what if I'm not good at it? What if I don't know how to be a friend? What if I disappoint you, or worse, what if I hurt you somehow? The fear in her voice was so genuine, so vulnerable, that Marcus felt the urge to cross the room and offer some kind of comfort. But he sensed that this was a moment where words would be more helpful than physical proximity. Zarath, he said gently, friendship isn't a skill you have to master before you begin. It's something you learn by doing, and you learn it with the other person. We'd figure it out together. You'd be patient with me, even if I made mistakes. I'd be honored to learn with you, even if we both made mistakes. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the plaza where beings from dozens of species went about their daily business, most of them maintaining the careful emotional distance that kept the galaxy functioning. Marcus, she said finally, would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not for diplomatic reasons, not for enforcement business, just because we want to spend time together. The question was asked so quietly that Marcus almost missed it. When the meaning registered, he felt something shift in his chest, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. I would love to have dinner with you, he said simply. Even though I might be terrible at it. Even though I might spend the whole time asking awkward questions or talking about enforcement protocols. Especially because of those things. I want to know what questions you want to ask, and I want to hear what you think about your work when you don't have to be officially diplomatic about it. Zarath turned back to face him, and Marcus saw something new in her expression, something that looked like hope mixed with determination. When, she asked. Whenever you want, tonight if you're free. Tonight feels very soon. We don't have to wait for some perfect moment, Zarath. We can just start. She nodded slowly, as if accepting a challenge that both excited and terrified her. Tonight then, but Marcus. Yes. Can we go somewhere that's not in the diplomatic quarter, somewhere that's just normal? Marcus smiled at Zarath's request, understanding exactly what she meant. The diplomatic quarter was all formal restaurants and carefully neutral spaces designed to avoid offending any species. It was the kind of place where every conversation was automatically filtered through professional considerations. I know the perfect place, he said. There's a little restaurant in the civilian sector that serves food from about 20 different worlds. Nothing fancy, but the owner is this elderly Centaurian who treats every customer like family. That sounds perfect. Zarath paused at his office door as if something had just occurred to her. Marcus, is this what humans call a date? The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd been so focused on the friendship aspect of their conversation that he hadn't fully processed the other implications of what was happening between them. Do you want it to be a date? Zarath's scales shifted to that luminous gold color again, and Marcus realized that might be the draconian equivalent of a blush. I don't know, she admitted. I've never been on a date. I don't know the difference between a date and dinner between friends. Honestly, sometimes there isn't much difference. Sometimes it's just about spending time with someone you want to know better and seeing what develops naturally. What develops naturally, Zarath repeated, as if testing the concept. That sounds both wonderful and terrifying. Most good things do. After Zarath left his office, Marcus found it impossible to concentrate on the trade reports scattered across his desk. Their conversation kept replaying in his mind, each exchange revealing new layers of complexity to their developing relationship. He'd gone from being fined for diplomatic charm to discussing the possibility of friendship to whatever tonight was going to be. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how significant this was, not just for him and Zarath, but potentially for interstellar relations as a whole. Personal relationships between representatives of different species were rare, and romantic relationships were almost unheard of. The cultural barriers alone were enormous, never mind the practical considerations. But then he remembered the way Zarath's voice had softened when she asked about friendship, the vulnerability she'd shown when admitting her fears about connection. This wasn't about interstellar relations or diplomatic precedent. This was about two people who had found something unexpected in each other. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, with limited success. Every few minutes, he'd catch himself wondering what Zarath was thinking, whether she was having second thoughts, whether she was as nervous as he was about the evening ahead. At 6 o'clock, he made his way to Stellar Eats, the Centaurian restaurant he'd suggested. It was located in one of the older sections of Nexus Station, where the corridors were narrower and the lighting was warmer. The civilian sector had a different energy than the diplomatic quarter, less formal, more lived in, filled with the kind of small businesses that catered to the beings who called the station home rather than just visiting for official business. Marcus arrived first and was greeted by Corvin, the elderly Centaurian who owned the restaurant. Like most Centaurians, Corvin was humanoid but taller and more slender than humans, with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. Ambassador Chen, Corvin's voice carried the musical quality that made Centaurian's speech so pleasant to listen to. How wonderful to see you, your usual table. Actually, I'm meeting someone tonight. Could we have something a bit more private? Corvin's eyes twinkled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as Centaurian amusement. Ah, a special dinner. Of course, I have the perfect spot. He led Marcus to a small alcove in the back of the restaurant, separated from the main dining area by hanging plants that provided both privacy and a view of the small garden that Corvin maintained in an unused section of the station. The table was sized for two, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that managed to be warm without being too intimate. This is perfect, thank you. My pleasure, Ambassador. Now, will your companion have any dietary restrictions I should know about? She's draconian. Corvin's eyebrows rose slightly. Centaurians were one of the few species whose facial expressions humans could read easily. A draconian? How fascinating. I don't believe I've ever served a draconian here before. They usually prefer the high-temperature restaurants in the military district. This one is different. I see. Well, fortunately, I have several dishes that should work perfectly. The Rigelian flamefish is quite popular with heat-loving species, and the spiced kelp from Aquatica Prime has a nice sulfurous undertone that many draconians enjoy. Marcus was touched by Corvin's immediate accommodation. This was exactly what he'd hoped for, a place where differences were welcomed rather than merely tolerated. That sounds perfect, thank you, Corvin. Of course, and Ambassador, I hope your evening is illuminating. Marcus settled into his chair and tried to calm his nerves. He'd been on dates before, obviously, but this felt different, more significant somehow. Maybe it was because Zarath had been so honest about her inexperience with personal relationships, or maybe it was because he was genuinely uncertain about what the evening would bring. 15 minutes later, Zarath appeared in the doorway of the alcove, and Marcus felt his breath catch. She was still wearing her enforcement uniform, but somehow she looked different, softer, more approachable. Her scales had settled into that warm, golden color, and her posture was more relaxed than he'd ever seen it. "Sorry I'm late," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I've never eaten in the civilian sector before. I got a bit lost." "No problem at all. I was enjoying the quiet." Zarath looked around the alcove, taking in the hanging plants and soft lighting. "This is beautiful, very different from the restaurants I'm used to." "Different how?" "More personal. The places I usually eat are designed for efficiency, fast service, standardized portions, minimal interaction with staff. This feels like someone's home." That's exactly what Corvin is going for. He says that food tastes better when you feel welcome. As if summoned by his name, Corvin appeared with menus and a gentle smile. "You must be Ambassador Chen's companion. Welcome to Stellar Eats." Zarath looked uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how to respond to such casual warmth. "Thank you, I'm Zarath." "A beautiful name. I've prepared several options that I think you might enjoy, but please let me know if you have any preferences or restrictions." Marcus watched with interest as Zarath navigated this interaction. She was clearly out of her comfort zone, but she was making an effort to engage rather than retreating into official formality. "I appreciate your consideration," she said carefully. "I confess I'm not familiar with most cuisine outside of draconian standards." "Then tonight will be an adventure." Corvin's enthusiasm was infectious. "I'll bring out a few small dishes to start. Think of it as a culinary exploration." After he left, Zarath looked across the table at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts nervous and excited. "He's very friendly," she said. "Too friendly." "No, it's just different. Most beings are more reserved around draconians, more formal." "Do you prefer formal interactions?" Zarath considered this seriously. "I thought I did, but sitting here having someone treat me like a welcome guest instead of a potential threat, it's nice. Unexpected, but nice." Their conversation was interrupted by Corvin returning with a tray of small dishes. "We have here some flamefish from Rigel 7, some spiced kelp with sulfur crystals, and some roasted root vegetables from my homeworld. Please, try everything and tell me what you think." Marcus watched as Zarath tentatively tried each dish, her expression shifting from uncertainty to surprise to genuine pleasure. "This is remarkable," she said after tasting the flamefish. "The heat level is perfect, but there are flavors here I've never experienced before. What are these spices?" "Ah, you have an excellent palate." Corvin looked delighted. "The fish is seasoned with a blend of fire peppers from 3 different worlds, plus some herbs that grow only in high-radiation environments. Very few beings can detect all the individual flavors." Marcus felt a surge of pride watching Zarath interact with Corvin, seeing her natural curiosity override her learned caution. "Corvin," Marcus said, "would it be possible to get the recipe for this? I think Zarath might enjoy trying to recreate it." "You cook?" Corvin asked Zarath with obvious interest. Not really. I mean, I can prepare basic meals, but nothing like this." "Cooking is just chemistry with tastier results," Corvin said with a laugh. "If you're interested, I'd be happy to teach you sometime." After Corvin left them to their meal, Zarath looked across the table at Marcus with wonder in her eyes. "He offered to teach me to cook," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "He did? How does that make you feel?" "Surprised, happy, confused." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Marcus, is this what it's like for you all the time? People just offering kindness without expecting anything in return?" "Not all the time, but more often than you might expect. Most beings are decent once you get past the formal barriers." "But how do you trust it? How do you know that someone's kindness is genuine and not manipulation?" Marcus thought about the question seriously. "I guess I've decided that the risk of being occasionally deceived is worth the reward of genuine connection. And honestly, I think most people can tell the difference between real kindness and manipulation if they pay attention." "What's the difference?" Real kindness doesn't come with strings attached. It doesn't make you feel obligated or uncomfortable. It just is. Zareth nodded slowly, testing this concept against her own experiences. Like when you helped me with the crystals, she asked. That was real kindness. That was real kindness. You didn't do it because you had to or because you expected something in return. You did it because you saw someone who needed help, and helping felt like the right thing to do. I never thought of it that way. Maybe because you were raised in a culture that taught you to be suspicious of kindness, to always look for the angle or the weakness it might reveal. Zareth was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes thoughtful. Marcus, she said finally, can I tell you something about draconian culture that most species don't know? I'd love to hear it. We're not naturally cold or distant. That's learned behavior, drilled into us from childhood as a survival mechanism. Young draconians are actually quite affectionate, quite eager to connect with others. What changes that? Training, discipline, the constant message that emotion is weakness, that caring too much about others makes you vulnerable. Her voice carried a sadness that Marcus had never heard before. By the time we reach adulthood, most of us have learned to bury those instincts so deeply that we forget they ever existed. But they're still there. They're still there. And sometimes when someone shows you unexpected kindness or treats you like a person instead of a threat, those buried instincts start to surface again. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of Zarath and of draconians in general. The fierce, independent warriors he'd always heard about were actually people who had been taught to suppress their natural inclination toward connection. Is that what's happening to you? He asked gently. Are those instincts surfacing? Yes, she said simply, and it's terrifying because I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to be affectionate or caring or normal. Zareth, you've been all of those things tonight. You've been curious about the food, grateful to Corvin, honest with me about your fears. That's not abnormal, that's beautiful. She looked up at him with those golden eyes, and Marcus saw something vulnerable and hopeful there. You really think so? I know so. They continued eating and talking, the conversation flowing more naturally than Marcus had ever experienced with anyone. Zareth asked questions about Earth, about human families, about what it was like growing up in a culture that encouraged emotional expression. Marcus asked about draconian traditions beyond the military ones, about what Zareth had wanted to be before she became a soldier. It was during dessert, a Centaurian delicacy that tasted like crystallized starlight, that Zareth asked the question that changed everything. Marcus, she said, her voice carefully casual, what would happen if someone like me, someone in a position of authority, was to become personally involved with someone like you? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them had addressed directly until now. Officially, Marcus asked, or practically? Both. Marcus set down his spoon and looked at her seriously. Officially, there are no regulations against personal relationships between representatives of different species. The Trade Council recognizes that such connections can actually improve diplomatic relations. And practically it would be complicated. We'd have to navigate cultural differences, professional considerations, the opinions of our respective governments. He paused. But Zarath, are you asking about hypothetical complications or are you asking about us? She met his eyes directly, and Marcus saw something brave and determined in her expression. I'm asking about us, she said quietly. I'm asking if you think there could be an us. Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment at Zarath's question. The directness of it, the vulnerability required to ask it, the implications of what she was suggesting, it all hit him at once, leaving him momentarily speechless. Zarath, he said carefully, are you sure you want me to answer that question? Because once we have this conversation, we can't go back to pretending it was just about friendship. I don't want to go back, she said firmly. I've spent my entire life pretending to be something I'm not, following protocols that keep me isolated from real connection. Tonight, sitting here with you, talking about everything and nothing, this is the first time I've felt like myself in years. I don't want to give that up. Marcus reached across the table, covering her clawed hand with his own. The gesture was simple, but it felt momentous, the first truly intimate contact between them. To answer your question, he said softly. Yes, I think there could very definitely be an us. I think there already is an us. We just haven't named it yet. Zareth's scales shifted to that luminous gold color, and Marcus realized he was beginning to read her emotional states through these subtle changes. What would that mean? She asked. What would an us look like? I don't know, Marcus admitted. I've never been in a relationship with someone from another species, let alone someone whose culture is so different from mine. We'd have to figure it out as we go. That doesn't scare you? It terrifies me, Marcus said with a laugh. But the alternative, going back to the way things were before tonight, pretending this connection doesn't exist, that scares me more. Zareth turned her hand palm up, her fingers intertwining with his. The scales on her hand were surprisingly warm, with a texture that was somewhere between leather and silk. Marcus, she said quietly, I need to tell you something about the fine I gave you that first day. What about it? I didn't have to fine you. The Thorian complaint was minor, well within my discretionary authority to dismiss with a warning. I fined you because I wanted an excuse to talk to you longer. Marcus stared at her, processing this admission. You used your official position to extend our conversation. Yes, and I've been looking for excuses to interact with you ever since. The follow-up visits, the additional questions about human diplomatic customs, none of that was strictly necessary. Zareth, that's an abuse of my authority, I know. She looked down at their joined hands. I've never done anything like that before. I've always been completely professional, completely by the book. But something about you made me want to bend the rules, and that scared me enough that I tried to find official reasons to justify it. Marcus felt a surge of affection so strong it almost overwhelmed him. The idea that this fierce, disciplined enforcement officer had been manufacturing excuses to spend time with him, struggling with feelings she didn't know how to process. It was endearing and heartbreaking at the same time. For what it's worth, he said, I've been hoping you'd find more excuses. I looked forward to your visits, even when they meant I was in trouble. Really? Really? You were the most interesting part of my day, even when you were lecturing me about Trade Council regulations. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of these admissions. The restaurant around them had grown quieter as the evening progressed, most of the dinner crowd having moved on to other venues or returned to their quarters. Marcus, Zareth said eventually, what happens now? It was a simple question with complicated implications. What did happen when a human ambassador and a draconian enforcement officer decided to explore a relationship that had no precedent in galactic history? Now we take it one day at a time, Marcus said. We figure out how to balance our professional responsibilities with our personal feelings. We learn about each other's cultures, each other's expectations, each other's fears. And if it doesn't work, if the cultural differences are too great or if our respective governments object, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Zareth, I've spent 3 years learning that the galaxy is full of impossible things that somehow work out anyway. Species that should be natural enemies find ways to cooperate. Completely different cultures discover common ground. Maybe two very different people can build something together that's stronger than either of them alone. Zareth squeezed his hand gently. You make it sound so simple. The feeling is simple. The execution might be complicated. What feeling? Marcus looked into her golden eyes, seeing not the intimidating enforcement officer, but the curious, caring person who had slowly revealed herself over the course of their conversations. The feeling that I care about you, he said simply. That I want to know everything about you, that I want to be part of your life, that the thought of going back to formal professional interactions makes me genuinely sad. I care about you too, Zareth said softly. More than I thought I was capable of caring about anyone. When I think about my life before tonight, it feels gray, functional but gray. And when I think about my life moving forward, if you're in it, it feels full of color. The poetry of her words, the unexpected romanticism from someone who claimed not to understand warmth, took Marcus's breath away. Zareth, he said, would it be appropriate for me to kiss you right now? Her scales shifted to an even brighter gold, and Marcus saw something that looked like surprise and pleasure and nervousness all mixed together. I don't know what's appropriate, she admitted, but I would like that very much. Marcus leaned across the small table, conscious of the fact that they were in a public place, but unable to resist the pull he felt toward her. The kiss was gentle, tentative, their first attempt at physical intimacy between two species with very different biologies. Zarath's lips were warmer than human lips, with a texture that was uniquely her own. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like a bridge being built between two worlds. When they pulled apart, Zarath was staring at him with wonder. "That was," she started, then shook her head. "I don't have words for what that was. Good different or bad different. Beautiful different, like nothing I've ever experienced before." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest, a combination of affection and relief and anticipation for whatever came next. "So," he said with a smile, "I guess this officially counts as a date now." "I suppose it does." Zarath paused, as if a thought had just occurred to her. "Marcus, there's something I should probably mention." "What's that?" In draconian culture, kissing someone is considered a declaration of intent. It means you're interested in a serious relationship, not just casual romance. Marcus felt a moment of panic, wondering if he'd inadvertently committed to something he wasn't prepared for. But then he looked at Zarath's expression, saw the hope and vulnerability there, and realized that serious was exactly what he wanted. "Good thing I'm interested in a serious relationship then," he said. "You are?" "With you, absolutely." The smile that spread across Zarath's features was radiant, transforming her entire face from its usual serious expression into something joyful and young. "So what does that mean exactly?" she asked. "In human culture?" "It means we see where this goes. We spend time together, we learn about each other, we see if we can build something lasting." Marcus paused, struck by the magnitude of what they were discussing. "Zarath, are we really doing this? Are we really starting an interspecies relationship that's going to require us to figure out everything from scratch?" "I think we are," she said, sounding as amazed as he felt. "And Marcus?" "Yes. I can't wait to figure it out with you." 3 months later, Marcus was reviewing quarterly trade reports in his office when Zarath appeared in his doorway, just as she had that first day when she'd come to talk about choice and connection. But now, instead of uncertainty, there was something playful in her expression. "Ambassador Chen," she said in an official tone that didn't match the warmth in her golden eyes, "I'm here to inform you that you're in violation of Trade Council Regulation 1247. Marcus looked up from his reports with exaggerated concern. "Oh no, what have I done now?" "You've been conducting unauthorized diplomatic relations with a draconian enforcement officer. The relationship appears to have resulted in significant improvements in interspecies cooperation, increased cultural exchange, and what witnesses describe as disgusting amounts of happiness." Marcus laughed, standing up to greet her properly. Over the past 3 months, they developed their own rituals and jokes, their own ways of bridging the gap between their professional roles and their personal relationship. "And what's the penalty for this terrible crime?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "A lifetime of continued violations," Zarath said, her official tone dissolving into something soft and affectionate, "with the possibility of parole for good behavior." "I think I can live with that sentence." As they kissed in his office doorway, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first fine for excessive diplomatic charm. The galaxy hadn't ended because a human and a draconian had chosen connection over distance. If anything, their relationship had become a symbol of what was possible when beings chose to see past cultural barriers. Other species had begun to follow their example. Formal diplomatic protocols were slowly being updated to acknowledge that personal relationships could enhance rather than compromise professional effectiveness. The Trade Council was even considering establishing a new category of diplomatic immunity for interspecies couples. But beyond the political implications, beyond the precedent they were setting for galactic relations, Marcus had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: a partner who challenged him, supported him, and made every day feel like an adventure. "Marcus," Zarath said, pulling back from their kiss with a mischievous expression, "I have something to tell you." "What's that?" "Remember that first day, when I fined you for excessive diplomatic charm?" "How could I forget?" "Well," she said, her scales shifting to that luminous gold that meant she was feeling particularly happy, "if you weren't married, I'd give you my number." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. Zarath, we've been together for 3 months. You have my number. You literally live in my quarters half the time. I know, she said with that dry humor he'd learned to love. But I thought it was time I officially offered. And if I were married, then I'd probably have some very serious questions about your commitment to honesty in relationships. Marcus kissed her again, marveling at how she could make him laugh even in moments of tenderness. This was what he'd never expected to find in the depths of space. Not just love, but partnership, not just attraction, but genuine friendship and understanding. For the record, he said against her lips, I'm not married and I would absolutely take your number. Good, Zarath murmured back, because I was planning to give it to you whether you wanted it or not. Draconian courtship customs are very aggressive. I'm learning that about you. You haven't learned anything yet. Wait until you meet my family. Marcus felt a moment of terror at the thought of meeting a family of 7-foot dragon warriors. But then he looked into Zarath's golden eyes and realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. After all, they'd already proven that the impossible was possible. A human who weaponized niceness and a dragon who enforced the rules had found a way to build something beautiful together. If they could manage that, they could probably handle anything the galaxy threw at them. Even draconian in-laws. I love you, Marcus said, the words coming easily now, though they'd been difficult to say the first time. I love you too, Zarath replied, her voice carrying that distinctive rumble that had once intimidated him and now felt like coming home. Even if you do have excessive diplomatic charm. Especially because I have excessive diplomatic charm. Especially because of that. As they stood there in his office doorway, holding each other while the galaxy continued its business around them, Marcus realized that this was what he'd been unconsciously searching for all his life. Not just someone to love, but someone who understood that love itself was an act of diplomacy, a choice to build bridges instead of walls, to seek connection instead of maintaining distance. In the end, that's what made them perfect for each other. They were both in the business of bringing different worlds together. They just never expected to make it quite so personal. The galaxy was a big place, full of different species and competing interests and complex political alliances. But it was also, Marcus had learned, a place where a human ambassador and a dragon warrior could find each other against all odds, could build something lasting and beautiful and completely unprecedented. And if that was possible, then anything was possible. Even happiness, even forever, even love that transcended every barrier the universe had tried to put in their way. The dragon warrior had been fining him for excessive diplomatic charm, and then she'd offered him her number. It was, Marcus thought, the beginning of the most beautiful diplomatic incident in galactic history.